podcast. We're here with Polly. Hello.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I guess where I'd like to start is just to sort of say to listeners that this particular episode, I'd like to focus the whole arc of it on stuff to do with confidence and things in general. The whole point of the Inner Melody is the fact that it's a way of music addressing problems that are just human problems, I suppose, like confidence, like success, like anything like that. So in this particular episode, I want to focus on that confidence aspect. So before we go into any of that, tell us a bit about yourself, Paul, and just like where you've, what you're into, music and, you know, all that stuff. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm just a small town music teacher. I'm all my work's completely freelance. I tend to specialise day to day in teaching singing lessons 1-to-1 in my own studio. I've worked in all sorts of places over the years. I've taught at schools, colleges, universities, but at the moment my teaching is 1-to-1, which I really love. It really allows me to build a rapport with each of my students and to work out what motivates them. And
how many students do you reckon you've got?
Oh, at the moment, not many at the moment. I'm just easing back in after all the COVID restrictions and making sure that everybody feels safe coming into the studio. So building in time in between everybody's lessons to make sure everything's clean. So because of that, it's reduced the number of students that I have at the moment. But but it's building up again nicely, and I'm keeping it at a pace that I feel that I can keep everyone safe.
At bay, away from you, yeah.
Keep all of them safe.
So, getting into music then, how did you start off? How did you get into music? Where like, so for example, for me, it was something where I'd just always been around music. My dad, obviously musician, you'd know about that.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, you've heard of him. He's, he was sort of my kind of a first into music, I suppose. But for anyone listening, that you don't necessarily need, a person in the family to be a musician or something. It's like we all love music. So can you remember a time that you feel like you go, I love music so much that I want to, pursue it?
It's funny. Just with you asking me that question, I hadn't. And I was trying to think what you might want to chat about in this interview, and something came up when you were just asking the question that hadn't occurred to me in the week. But I suppose I'd always been aware of music. When you're a toddler and you're a baby, and some people are very aware of visual things, and from an early age, I think just any time there was music, it really caught my attention. And my mum and dad were sort of more into classical music than anything else. But they said that when I was quite little and I was learning to speak, I was trying to say something, and they said it sounded like the Scheherazade that I was trying to say. But they used to listen to Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade on an old LP, which I loved, and that piece of music really caught my imagination as a little child, and I've not thought about that for years actually. But that was one of the first pieces of classical music that I remember. Really latching onto and trying to say it when I was teeny tiny. But
was that something that so was the classical music did that was something that came first? And because I'm aware that you obviously love like rock bands and a lot of pop music and things like that and stuff. So was that a natural thing? You went from classical into pop and just loved it, or
it was just all music as far as I was concerned. Yeah. It wasn't that I like this kind of music, but I'm not sure about that. It was just if it was music, I'd like let me listen to it, let me find out about it. Yeah. What is it? What makes this music different from that music? And people who listen to this music dress like this and look like that. And people who listen to that. So I was just interested in everything that was surrounding the music as well, the theatre of it. That's the tradition that if you go to a concert and you listen to classical music, people behave in this way and they dress that way. And after at a classical concert, you're not allowed to clap until this point, and then it's very sedate. And if you go to a rock concert, you can dress like this. And if you listen to country music, oh wow, you can behave like that. And I just loved all the theatre that's not just the music itself, but I loved
the show
of it, the showmanship, and also the the way that the audience interacted with each different style of music really just excited me and fascinated me from an early age.
Do you think then that do you think that different types of music, like listening to different types of music, do you think it says something about you? Do you think, because like you've said, so for example, a lot of people, like you just said then, at a classical concert, you must behave like this. And at a rock gig, you can behave like this and so on and so forth. So do you think that listening to that particular, because you do meet people, I'm right in saying that, aren't you? Like you meet people that are very sort of like, oh, I never listen to jazz. Jazz is terrible or something. And I'm constantly saying, why are you shutting that down? That's such a huge area of, life that you just kind of, you're closing yourself off from. So do you think that listening to particular types of music says something about you as a person?
I think it can do. What I always love is when people surprise me. So when I meet somebody and I really like it if people go against what our preconceptions about them might be. So if I meet somebody and then they suddenly admit that, they're into a style of music that you think, well, based on what I know about you and perhaps the way that you seem to interact and the way you go through the world and the way you dress, that isn't what I would have expected. But
right.
I really love that.
Yeah, okay.
I've got a new student at the moment, and when I had a chat with him over the phone to try and find out what it was that he wanted to work with a singing teacher, why he wanted to work with a singing teacher and what his goals were, there was, conversation about, Britpop and that sort of thing. I thought, okay. And I sort of knew the age of the chap. And I thought, okay, well, I sort of had an idea of the sort of work we would be doing and the sort of goals he would have. And then after a few lessons, and it usually takes a few lessons to build a bit of trust and build a bit of a rapport with a student.
Yeah.
And then there was suddenly a moment at the end of a lesson where I could see him thinking, and he said, I don't know if I'd really admit this to anyone, but I really like 80s power ballads. And I really loved that because it's really nice as a teacher when you've got to the point where somebody trusts that you are going to have their best interests at heart and that you're going to sort of hold their hand through the journey and say, well, if that's what you want to do, yeah, come on,
why not?
Let me help you. Let me help you work on that thing that you think perhaps because of, I don't know, your gender, your age, your upbringing, that's not a type of music that's for you. Never mind all that. Let's just, if that's the music that really excites you and engages you and speaks to you, let's explore that.
Let's explore it.
I would perhaps like to invite government to think a bit more carefully about funding for music and the other arts in schools. Because in the last few years, since the introduction of the English Baccalaureate, funding for the arts is
nearly non-existent.
And sometimes some good schools are still choosing to fund the arts through other sources of income that they have. But I think it's very difficult for them to make that choice and they have to justify that choice to their governors and all of that sort of thing. And there isn't a readily available pot of money that's just set aside for the arts these days, because if a school has a lot of subjects that they're being measured on,
right,
and the arts aren't included in that, it's very hard for them to justify putting a lot of money and time and staffing towards the arts if they know that when Ofsted come around or when all the benchmarks that they have to meet, everything's being measured and ticked. If they know that they have to have great marks in English, maths, science, then it's hard for them to justify spending on the arts. But we've seen in the last few years with all the lockdowns that it's been so valuable for people to have creative outlets.
I was just about to say,
so important for well-being.
Why should they invest in the arts? You know what I think about that, but why do you think that there should be money invested in the arts?
If we have to have a measurable reason, then I think we can see that involvement in creative endeavours is good for people's mental health. It's a really good outlet. It's good for well-being. It can be sociable, which again is good for people's well-being. But the arts can be and are they generate a lot of money for the British economy. So if you look at the information that the Incorporated Society of Musicians has
saw it recently.
all of the information about this.
Yeah.
But if we are not investing in the next generation of musicians, and our musicians are not allowed to easily leave the country because of Brexit, they're all now being charged the earth to go and perform in other countries.
Right.
What's the future? How would I say to a child who comes to me for a lesson, yes, it's worth you spending your time and spending your parents' money on learning music.
Learning music, right.
If there are no viable careers, if there's no viable output for them to be creative, yes, they can still get a great deal of pleasure from learning music. And I teach lots of people who don't want to be professional musicians. They just enjoy music, and that's great. Everybody should have the opportunity. But I think that's what drives me mad. Everybody should have the opportunity to have a creative outlet if they want it. And it shouldn't just be, X child's parents can pay for them to have piano lessons, violin,
because
clarinet
they can
lessons,
afford it.
so they can
these
have
guys
it.
Can't because,
but
right.
That child who might be far more desperate to have a music lesson, or might have a greater natural talent, aptitude, the next Beethoven or the next Paul McCartney, or might be sitting in a school somewhere and they don't have access to an instrument. They don't have access to more than a token.
A recorder. That's what I
had in school. There are no recorders in schools anymore. They don't have access to regular quality tuition because it's not being funded, because it isn't fundamentally valued. And I think that's quite disheartening for professionals working as musicians. If you know that at a government level what you do isn't valued, and they can't see the point in investing in that for the next generation. I had a student say to me last year, who'd been really enjoying their lessons for ages, I'm not sure, I love my lessons, but I just don't know. I don't know if I should carry on because there's nowhere to perform anymore. So I think we do need to be quite careful to make sure that the next generation has the opportunity to have quality, meaningful music lessons, not just, it can't be tokenism. It's got to be proper skills that are transferable, not just, we're going to play samba drums for a couple of weeks and then we're never going to speak of music ever again.
Well, that's what we were talking about before. Like the career is not separate from the training, and it's not separate from the emotional attachment you put into the training and all that stuff. It's all linked. So when you do start to have that approach that is just the government doesn't really see the value in it, the school itself is understaffed and underfunded, so they don't put the time and resources into it. Therefore, the only quality that they get out of it students-wise is let's play the recorder for an hour, and it's totally unrelated to how you actually get a job in the industry and so on and so forth. Yeah. So constantly you've got this broken up, disconnected approach to getting into music, whereas I think what you're saying is that thing, why are we not connecting the dots right the way up to a sort of a funding level?
There are lots of great musicians and great music teachers out there, but there needs to be a context in which they can work, in which it's valued, and there needs to be continuity of good provision, not a little bit of this term. And a little bit of that if you're lucky next term. Same with dance, same with art, same with drama. It's really important that young people can express themselves in sport, whatever is their thing, but they need to be given the opportunity.
Okay, so bringing that round then into the confidence thing then. So students and things, because I have students as well, loads of them all talk to me about exactly that. So how do I admit that I'm into 80s power ballads, or how do I approach this particular thing? How do I approach this gig? How do I, and at this point, confidence isn't something that is just strictly limited to musicians, is it? It's not something that, it's a human thing to be full of confidence or lacking in confidence or whatever. So from your experience talking to like your students or whatever, do you think music bridges the gap for confidence? Do you think it's, did your student there with the 80s power ballad, is it just rapport that gave him that, or is there something else going on there, do you think?
It's a tricky one. You see, one of the professional bodies I belong to insists that in any of our advertising that any of its members puts out as singing teachers, we aren't allowed to say, and we will help you build confidence.
Right.
Because what we're doing is teaching music, teaching vocal technique. We're not life coaches. We're not counselors.
Right.
Although I think as one-to-one singing teachers, there's quite a lot that I'm not saying that we are therapists because we're not qualified as therapists, but there is quite a therapeutic component.
I completely agree.
To working with people, because I think when people come to you as musicians, perhaps more so as singers, because it's part of who you are. As it's created in your body. Your vocal sound's created in your body, and it's part of your identity as a human is the way you sound. And again, that's something some people are quite insecure about, the way they sound, if they don't like the sound of their speaking or singing voice.
Yeah.
If you learn to do something well and then you have the feedback of a good result, and that doesn't necessarily have to be music, actually. It's any sort of learning. So if you really commit to learning something and then you do some kind of test in that subject, or you go out amongst colleagues to see, how you stand up against colleagues in the same field. If you've done well, then it's the result of the positive outcome that then gives you the confidence. I don't think it's the music itself, I don't think gives you the confidence, but music can be a vehicle for...
So doing a thing, whether it's being a great accountant, baking a cake, singing a song, doing a thing well, and having that feedback that you've done well from someone or something, having someone to authenticate that and verify it, or, say well done or whatever. That's the thing that gives someone confidence. So going back to the students thing, how would you teach a prospective student who says, I have no confidence, I don't know how to get on stage, for example, but I really love music and I want to get into it more or something. And again, this is applicable for I want to be an accountant, but I don't know how to go to that job interview, or I want to, work in a coffee shop, but I don't know how to, all that stuff. How would you, approaching it through music, how would you teach a student to sort of push through that and get over it?
I don't know if I would teach them to push through it.
Right.
I think, well, I'll come back to that in a minute, because there is an element of that. I think what I would do is I would set small manageable goals. So each week we're not thinking, right, how would I go about performing at Wembley Stadium? Mm-hmm. Or even how would I go about doing a 20-minute solo spot at an open mic night at my local pub?
Yeah.
We'd be thinking, how can I sing the opening verse of this song that I've chosen as well as I can sing it?
Yeah.
So it would be breaking it down into, let's learn the melody, and then how do we deliver those words so that you're communicating the meaning behind that really well? How do you breathe so that you can best articulate the intent of the composer, or the emotion behind that lyric? So I think it's with the understanding of the content of the music, once you really dig down into the music itself. So that's where we come back to the sort of the music side of it. I think once you take sort of the ego away from it, and we say, well, we're not talking about standing up on stage and just making a noise and people watching us. We're talking about communicating a meaning, because whoever wrote the song
wants it to mean something.
There's an emotional. They're trying to communicate something, which is, again, I think why music means so much to so many people, because musicians and composers very skillfully articulate these great human feelings and these landmarks through life that many of us experience, and lots of songs about heartbreak out there. That's part of the journey through life for so many people. But I think when a composer, a songwriter, whatever you want to call it, puts that into words through their lyrics, but also through the harmonic structure and the melodic structure of the music, when that sort of that melody twists your heart, I think that speaks to people on such a deep level that what I like my students to do is to get in touch with that. Get in touch with that. And once they're in touch with that, well, not just singing a load of words like they're just, reciting a recipe or, reading their shopping list. So, well, no, don't just sing that lyric. What does that lyric mean?
Right. So so for, without dredging up the pun, it is the inner melody. It's that thing of it being the more in touch with that, just not just the superficial side of things, the superficial side of the music, for example, the more that you can actually delve into the process of what it's actually getting at, the meaning about it, the meaning that it brings for you as well, personally. That is, would you say, a door to open up confidence?
It's one step along the road.
It's one step. Go on, then what are the other steps?
Well, yeah, I suppose all I meant by that really is that instead of thinking I want to stand up there and just be seen and make a noise, if you look at what it is you're trying to communicate, then it takes the person and the ego away from it a little bit. So that's one step.
Right.
But then ultimately there is, which is why I said earlier, I might contradict myself in a moment, that the famous book by Susan Jeffers, which is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, I think there is a lot to be said for that, because I've had to say to students on numerous occasions, if you wait for the fear to go away before you do your first little performance, you'll be putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. At some stage, you have to say, what feels like a manageable way of making a first performance,
a bite-sized way. Right, okay.
So is it going to be ask your parent or your spouse or your friend to come into the end of your singing lesson for 10 minutes and just let them listen to what we've been working on in a very casual way? Just say, this is something we've been playing around with a bit, have a bit of fun with it. Or is it, we'll make a recording of what you've done in your lesson and you share it with your boyfriend, girlfriend, best mate.
Do you think your family are always your worst critics?
Well, they're always the hardest people to share it with, because if you do a musical performance for a stranger and they go, nah,
there's nothing lost.
There's nothing lost, because you think, oh, well, what do you know? And you'll never meet them again. So if you're busking on the street and some stranger walks past and goes, you're not my cup of tea, then it's very much easier to bear if somebody who you're very deeply emotionally invested in, so, partner, parent, somebody whose opinion really matters to you, who you've then got to face for the, next day if you feel you've made a mess of it. Yeah. Their opinion's so much more important. So it is really hard to expose yourself.
Definitely.
Which is how it feels for a lot of musicians.
Do you think that's why a lot of musicians, like up and coming musicians and things, do you think that's why they find it difficult to release new music or do gigs or something like that, because of the fear of what will happen? Like, are people gonna? Yeah, are they judging me if I put a song out there? That's my baby. I'm putting it out there, and they're going to tear it to pieces. Or
because
it might not even be true. But
the creative process is something. It's. I think to be creative, you have to be vulnerable in order to create. Whether it's as a performer or as a visual artist or as a songwriter, I think in order to really make something that is not just a sort of a thoughtless repetition of something that someone else has done,
100%.
which is without putting that. No, I don't want to put that down. But if you're just going out and you're singing someone else's song in a local bar and you're not giving too much thought to it, it's just like, I'm just going to sing this, and just for the fun of it.
Your heart isn't in it.
Your heart isn't in it. It's just for fun. Then perhaps the vulnerability doesn't come into play. But if you've written a song, or you've spent weeks in your singing lesson, your piano lesson, really, really trying to get to the crux of the emotional content of the music, and you really want to share something that's going to move your listener, which I personally think is what music's about. You want to reach into to another person, definitely, in some way, whether it's, again, as a visual artist or with music, you want to connect with another human being, even if there's only one other human being in the venue where you're playing who
definitely,
goes,
definitely.
Oh, that was exactly how I feel. That they've really nailed
the emotional connection.
How I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I think if you're making yourself that vulnerable, it can be quite a scary process to then sort of say to people, okay,
now judge me on it.
Now judge me on it. Yeah,
it is
like it's like standing naked in the town centre and saying to people, come and poke with a stick anything that you think's a bit iffy.
Do you think, do you think like, so for people who might want to listen who aren't necessarily musicians or whatever, like, do you think that happens for like, if you work on a building site, you make a building and it's your first, architecture job or something? Or,
I think anything you do that you commit to with whatever is your passion, I think it's much harder to listen to other people's criticism. The more of yourself that you've put into something, the harder it is to receive other people's criticism if they are not constructive.
Definitely.
Sometimes even if they are constructive, it's quite hard, but you can sort of take it on the chin. But if people are
just flippant
about it,
that's terrible. I hate that. Yeah, it's
especially if you feel that they haven't understood your intent in the first place.
Right.
I think that's even more. Have
you ever had that happen personally? Have you ever had that happen to you?
Oh, probably more times than I can count. Probably more times.
I know. Yeah. I have. I've definitely had that.
But I think that it's. I think if people really understand what you've tried to do, and they say you've not quite got there, that's probably easier to take than if you feel that they haven't really understood it and they've dismissed it anyway. That's frustrating.
Right.
That's more frustrating because you think, well, I've not reached them. They didn't even get
they didn't even make the effort to kind of try to understand it or something.
So then the self-doubt comes because it's, did I not do a good enough job to communicate it? Or is it just that they didn't have the capacity to receive it or to understand it?
Interesting, yeah. You were talking about, before you were talking about breaking things down into sort of manageable or bite-sized chunks. What would you say is something that you practice, because we're talking about practice basically, aren't we there?
Well,
what's a bite-sized chunk for you?
A bite-sized chunk for you? I do a lot of listening these days when I'm practicing because these days family commitments take up so much of my time that when I'm trying to balance that with work life and professional goals, I have to think, well, I've only got so much time before, this gig or this project. A lot of my time I spend listening, and I've become a much better listener throughout my career since I graduated. I think listening wasn't something that was particularly emphasized when I was training as a musician, and it's always felt like a weakness to me.
And just to be clear, we're talking listening to music, not just listening in general.
Yeah, well, listening to music specifically. So in terms of, I know some people, some of the jazz musicians I work with, oh my God, they're so good.
The way
they just instantly hear exactly what chord it is. They know what it is, and they know which inversion it is, and where the spacing is throughout the chord and which instrument's playing the top.
And they don't even need an instrument.
No, they don't even need. It's just there in their ears. Whereas I would hear it and go, oh, I need a piano to just confirm what I've heard.
Right.
So it's a slow process for me because it wasn't something that was emphasised during my training, really analytical listening. It was something, if you were going to be doing a grade exam, a few weeks before your exam, it'd be, these are the listening tests you've got to do in order to pass the exam.
Yeah.
Which meant that I went into the exams with enormous trepidation about that component of the exam because it wasn't something that was done routinely. It wasn't taught. It was just, and this is the hoop you've got to jump through in order to get your...
Just procedures and methods and
to finish
stuff to
the qualification.
Yeah.
Whereas it's such an important thing for a musician. Don't just make the noise. Listen to it.
And what you were saying before, don't just make the noise, but understand the connection between the noise, listening to the noise, and then that emotional connection to listening. And it's like I see it as like a really big circle of events that happens simultaneously when you
so connected.
Yeah, it's something where you don't just listen to a piece of music and that's it. I think, I'm trying to say, I guess, the confidence is not separate from the music. The listening is not separate from the confidence. They're all intrinsically linked together.
It's so,
and they're instantaneous as well. It's like as you're listening, as you're learning, as you're perceiving, they're all happening at the same time.
Yeah. But actually everything being interlinked takes me on to something that I feel really passionate about, which is music theory, which when it's mentioned as a separate thing aside from music.
Yeah, music playing is this, but theory is this. Yeah.
Oh, it's one of my personal bugbears because people will come and say, I want to learn to sing, but I don't want to know any theory.
Right.
And if somebody comes to me as an adult learner, then I have to respect that, because it's, they're paying for their hour a week or whatever it is. And I will focus on what they want to learn. Though I will usually say, that your musical theory is just understanding, isn't it? It's understanding the music. That's all music theory is. And it used to be, my first instrument when I was 7 was the violin. Now, that was an instrument I had no affinity with whatsoever. But yeah. I had no natural skill. But we had a violin in the house because my mum had played the violin as a schoolgirl. So we had a violin, and I really, really wanted to just learn music, anything. And so it was the easiest step. Well, try the violin, see how you get on. And it was taught that this is playing the violin and this is theory. So there was no, I think, understanding between, well, why do I have to draw semi-breves on a stave when all I want to do is make noise with this?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, I'm sad to say, I think a lot of that still goes on.
Definitely.
Whereas really, it's got to be more like, well, if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a storyteller, you can make the stories up in your head and you can tell them to people. But it's useful at some point to learn the alphabet, because then you can write your stories down and share them with more people. And then you can collaborate with other writers and say, oh, the way you did this, the way you turn your sentence this way round, and you punctuated that, and that actually gave the sentence a different meaning from if you would have punctuated it like this.
Yeah.
For me, that's all music theory is. It's just making sure that your understanding of the music and your ability to communicate it with other musicians goes along with the skill you're building as a performer.
I think it's that thing of not separating those points in it's a continuum of problems, I suppose. It's like the understanding of the violin is the playing of the violin, isn't it? Or should be, and when it's treated as a separate thing, like theory is one thing, the playing is the other, or if you wanted to be a writer, a computer programmer, a chef, whatever, you would have to know, as a chef, you would have to know something about the ingredients before you can actually get to the tasting of it and understanding the flavors.
And you have to understand measurement and proportion and all of those sort of things. You couldn't just say, oh, well, I love fresh vegetables. You'd have to think, well, if I'm going to add herbs to that to make it a bit more interesting, do I add a fistful, or is it,
Do you think that understanding, having that, so when you're without, because I definitely feel when I don't understand something, I don't feel confident.
I was just about to say, the students I've worked with who have embraced theory as part of, and understood that it's part of the process of becoming a performer, is understanding and having that musical vocabulary to be able to collaborate and
do it. Yeah.
They have always had greater confidence because that understanding is there. So if challenge comes up with the piece that they're learning, whether they're learning by ear or whether they're having to read a really complex score, if they understand what it is that's happening in the music, then they're not daunted by it.
Yeah.
But if the understanding isn't there, it's, oh, well, I don't know if I can sing that because I don't quite understand what's happening, because there's no context. It's hard to. I think context is so important for all of our learning.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
interesting. I find that it's really interesting when, like what you were saying, separating the theory from the doing. The doing is different from, doing it is similarly broken down into like, well, you can do it confidently or not confidently. And the sort of, I feel often they're treated, and this goes for all skills really, not just music, but, again, computer programming or being a footballer or anything. I think it's something that when you start to unite all those skills as one thing and they all become a simultaneous, confidence is learning is
buzzword for me there.
Go on then.
Somebody I admire greatly is a musician called Paul Harris. He's a performer, composer, and he's a virtuoso teacher.
Right,
he's I really admire his method of teaching music. He's written all sorts of books, so look him up. He's fabulous.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of meeting him in Liverpool a few years ago.
Wow.
well, because I invited him, actually. I invited him to come to Liverpool and speak to the local branch of the ISM, the Incorporated Society of Musicians, because I really admire the way he teaches music. He has a method that he calls simultaneous learning.
Right.
And I really think that this is what all teachers who are training singers and instrumentalists
need to get involved in.
I really think they should at least give his method a chance.
Do you think there's something in that approach, in that method, that doesn't just apply to music but applies to all teaching, or is it just?
I suppose it could, because, well, to put a music to give it the example through music, and people can apply this to their own fields as they like. But he would, the opening of one of his books, he says that he observed music lessons where a child would be told, right, okay, today you're going to play the E major scale. Right, because that's what you need to know today. Mm-hmm. So a child would play the E major scale, and probably in 4/4, da 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 da, and then they'd go away and they'd be playing a piece of music that was in G, and it was in 3/4, and they'd be sort of, right, start playing this piece of music, and the child plays, or the student, the learner, not always the child, the learner will play until they make a mistake, and then the teacher goes, stop. Right, this is what you did wrong. Mm. Whereas ideally, to prepare a student to learn a new piece of music, whether it's a song or an instrumental piece, the best thing to do as a teacher is say, right, let's play some games to start the lesson. We'll have a bit of fun around the G major scale today. And, I'll play a little pattern. You play a little pattern back to me in using the notes from the G major scale. And then we'll do an activity that involves working in 3/4. And that can either be playing something at an instrument, singing. In my case, I think with singing, it's a bit different because you don't have something to play. So I sometimes get my singers moving around and saying...
And actually physically walking around.
Physically walking around. And I've had classfuls of... when I used to teach secondary school, one of the GCSE topics used to be music for dance. And I used to just get them to all push chairs and tables out of the way. Okay, blazers off, loosen your ties. Today, we're going to learn about what the Argentine tango is, because we're all going to do a bit of Argentine tango. Right. Because I don't think...
that was chaos.
It was actually...
That was really good fun.
It was great. And the proof of the pudding's in the eating. Colleagues of mine who would be trying to teach kids the difference between a samba and an Argentine tango, because they, similar part of the world, perhaps similar instrumentation, or they would say, well, how do you get them to latch on to the difference? You say, this is dance music. Have you not tried getting them to move?
To actually, yeah.
And it was very gratifying that the kids in my classes would always say, oh yeah, but Argentine tango, that's the one that goes. And they'd put their body into a shape and they'd sort of move their feet and they'd say, well, when I'm listening to it, I can visualize that I stand like this and I move like this.
Interesting.
Because the music becomes an internal, it's something that they've felt rather than just something that they've observed and something that they've heard and had to try and just break down analytically because they've listened to it and they're thinking, well, what's that instrument and what's that? If they feel it, then when they hear it again, they can go, oh yeah, but that's the one where we went dum, da dum, dum, dum. And our feet had to do that and we had to stand with this posture. And
could you do some of the tango here now?
Probably not without disturbing the microphone. Maybe that's something for another day. But I think that's perhaps what you're getting back to with inner music. I think it's not just feeling it internally on an emotional level. Sometimes if you can internalize a rhythm, if you can
definitely
feel it. So I think sometimes in my lessons, I will get my students to move around rather than just, well, stand like this because we're singing this style of music.
Because by doing that, it separates them again, doesn't it? It separates the thing of like, the theory is this, but the doing of it is that. And
then the intellectual process is, I know that if it's written like that, it's got this time signature and we're likely to come across these rhythms and I need to look out for these motifs for it to be this style.
It's a big cerebral process. But
if you can feel it, it's much more direct when you revisit it and you come back to it and you say, oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Not just on an intellectual level, but it's a muscle memory, or it's like
an inner
Yeah.
An internalization of it, isn't it? Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So finally, I guess just what sort of, in terms of, not just in terms of confidence, but in terms of just getting into, the joy of music or the confidence aspect of music or the career of music or anything, do you have any key pieces of like wisdom, advice, anything like that for any listeners that, feel that they want to get into music a bit more and, they want to explore it?
Well, I would say just do it. Just do something. And that's not just for music. If you've got a goal or there's something you want to work towards, just make a start.
Right.
Because in the past, I've been guilty of overthinking things. And I think you know me well enough to know that that's the case. I've been reading an interesting book recently. What's it called? It's called Surrounded by Idiots. But that sounds like it's going to be some really negative book. It's about people having different personality types, and the author, whose name I'm sorry I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure Ben can put it in the blurb after.
Yeah.
Thank you. He puts personality types into 4 color categories, so blues, yellows, greens, and reds. I nailed you straight away. You're definitely a red. As I was reading the book, I was going, "Oh, this is so Ben."
I hope not the football team, though. Just to be clear,
it's about the author came up with this way of categorizing people for business, but it applies to all sorts of things. And in the past, I've been extremely blue. So think everything down to the last detail.
Right.
Overanalyze
everything. Things. Right. Okay.
But I've through chatting to you and other people around us, there's a lot to be said for just do it.
What, out of interest, what does red mean?
Very driven. Don't take any, am I allowed to say crap on this?
Yeah, you can say that. That's fine.
Just get it done. Just get it done. And don't listen to all the whys and wherefores. Just set the goal and just do it. And deal with anything afterwards. Just get it done. And I like that. And I like to think that lifelong learning is something that's really important. So I like to think, well, yeah, that's probably my base personality type. But if I know that's my personality type, I can work out that there are strengths in that, but the weaknesses are here, and here. So I can take...
You're thinking about it again,
I'm thinking about it again.
You're thinking about it.
But I can see the examples of colleagues and friends and think, right, well, how would Ben do that? Ben would just do that. So maybe that's a good way of doing it. And another author, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, talks about good...
I know Rangan really well.
Yeah. You know him?
I know him, yeah.
Well, his ideas about the pillars for good health, I think are really good. And something that from one of his books that really spoke to me was, he says, oh, well, is it worth doing if I can only do it for 5 minutes a day? Like exercise or if, a healthy lifestyle habit. And he said, if you were going to smoke for 5 minutes a day for your whole life or for the rest of your life, that would certainly have an impact. And I'm paraphrasing here, if you're going to eat lard every day for 5 minutes, that would certainly have an impact. So why can't a good habit for 5 minutes a day
be something equally impactful?
Be something, even you might not notice it as dramatically, but if there was a good habit, say with picking up your instrument, if there was something that your lifestyle only allowed you to do for 5 minutes a day, so I don't know, working on any aspect of your practice that was a challenge to you. So for some people it might be scales or
confidence.
Or whatever it is that you can work on. If you did that for 5 minutes every day, then you would see a difference. So I think my thing would be just do it, just do something. And not just in music, but in all aspects of my life. I'm never happy if there's a situation and I'm not doing something about it. So if a challenge in life occurs, I can't bear to sit back and just go, that's not good. What should we do about that? I'd rather think, well, all right, there must be something. So just do something. And I think that applies to music. If there's something in your music that in your music making that you're not happy with. So if it's songwriting, if it's, my lyrics all sound really trite, just write, put the kettle on and while it's boiling, just try and scribble some lyrics. And if you did that for 5 minutes every day for a year, you'd probably find that you were improving as a lyricist. Or,
well, it's 365 5 minutes, isn't it? So which as bite-sized chunks
Just do it. Just do it. But bear in mind that the confidence, don't wait for confidence before you do something, because confidence usually comes as a byproduct of success. So have the courage to do something little. And when that goes well,
be red. Be red.
Yeah.
Go out there, be red.
Try and have a bit, try and be a bit more a red person.
Polly, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.